Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Transport Focus's COVID debate. I'm Anthony Smith, Chief Executive of Transport Focus. I'm going to be chairing this event this afternoon, and you're all very, very welcome. We have 350 plus people registered. There's a lot of people out there. That's great. Transport Focus, most of you will know us, I hope, we're the independent statutory watchdog for Britain's transport users. And I hope this afternoon we're going to demonstrate that we are consumer focused, we are useful, and we are evidence based. We've got a great panel lined up for you this afternoon. We've got Mary Hewitt, Arriva UK Strategy and Policy Director for Trains. We've got Christine McGlasson, Explore Dundee's Managing Director. We've got Councillor Wazim Zafar, Birmingham City Council Cabinet Member for Transport and Environment, Victoria Garcia, MBE, Brighton and Hove Buses, and our very own Louise Coward, our Head of Insight. Very simple task this afternoon. We are going to try and answer two questions and crystallise some of the huge amount of events in this incredibly turbulent last 8 months that we've had. What have we learned about public transport in the last 8 months that we want to keep hold of as we move ahead into next year? And secondly, as and when we want to start attracting people back to rail and bus, what is it that's got to change to be able to do that? Because clearly an awful lot has changed in the last few months. You can put your comments and put your questions into the chat box, please, and there'll be time at the end to cover some of those. So please get into a chat, please ask questions, and we hope this is a useful afternoon and as interactive as we can make it. So good. Let's kick off. The first off is Louise Coward, our Head of Insight, who is going to summarise what we've learned in the last few months. Louise, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anthony, and hello, everybody. So I'm going to set the scene by running through what we've been doing during the pandemic to understand users. I'm going to talk about what we've been finding out and what we're planning to do. So since the start of May, so about 6 weeks into the lockdown, we've been asking 2,000 people every single week, how have they been traveling? If they've traveled, what was it like? If people haven't traveled, how they feel about going back. And we've been asking about likely future. And we also have user communities where we can speak to people in more detail about what they're doing, why they're doing it, and we can test some ideas and concepts with them. And we'll be hearing from some members of those communities a little bit later on today. Every week we publish these reports on our website and we put the data on our data hub so everybody can use our data, do their own analysis and find out more information. So that's what we've been doing and what have we been finding. In a tiny nutshell here, unsurprisingly, there has been relatively limited use of public transport. That's no surprise. Back in early May, we can see that we were looking at around 5% who'd used any public transport, predominantly bus and a little bit of rail. And we've seen that climb a little over the summer period. The peak that we picked up was 19% who had used any public transport. That was kind of right at the end of August into September. And it has fallen back slightly since then as more restrictions and lockdown have come in. Kind of stating the obvious here, but I'll say it anyway. We all know that using the bus or the train right now looks and feels quite different. Overall satisfaction with journeys is around 3/4 on both bus and rail, so not bad. But we know that when you ask people about what the journey was like and was it satisfactory, they're thinking about different things when they're answering that question than they were back before the pandemic. And we also know that their priorities for what companies should focus on and should try and improve also look quite different now. New things have come into play. And that's kind of summarised as the, do I feel safe? Will I be okay travelling by public transport now COVID is around? And when you ask that specific question, in the most recent 3-week period, more than 8 out of 10 rail users and bus users said that they felt safe using those modes. So that's pretty good, but there is room to improve. But what's quite interesting is that when you ask people who haven't made journeys how safe they think it would be, less than half are saying that they would imagine that they would feel safe. So we need to understand much more about this so we know what is going to give them that kind of encouragement and reassurance. When you unpick with users what constitutes feeling safe or unsafe, the kinds of things that they mention focus on some new specifics, things such as, are other passengers wearing face coverings? Is it okay to social distance? Is there enough space? Does it feel clean? Can I see visible cleaning? And how are other passengers behaving? Is everybody following the rules, or am I seeing other people doing things that are making me feel uncomfortable? And we've been monitoring these specific measures over time. And recognizing how important these things are, we've put all this together into a dashboard which summarizes all of this information, and which we're going to start updating on a weekly basis on our website alongside the more detailed published reports and the data. And I can give you a sneak preview of that today. And here it is. And effectively, it means we can see the scores for that overall safety measure over time. We can see the trend, we can see the detail and the breakdown of what proportions who say they feel safe said very safe and fairly safe. And we can also see how the performance is for those individual things that I talked about. And you can toggle between bus and rail on this. So it's a really nice way of summarizing all those kinds of things that I was just talking about. And looking to the future, what's going to happen next? We don't really know, do we? That's part of the problem. There just is this huge uncertainty about what is life going to look like, and within that, what is transport use going to look like? People are expecting things to look different in both the shorter term and beyond. And so to kind of address that, what we're going to be doing is more of what we have been. We're going to keep on finding out what people think. What is it like out there? And we're going to keep sharing this information and making sure that it's used as widely as possible, and actually help the people who are using it to make the right kinds of decisions and help them improve things for passengers and give the reassurance that is needed. And at the same time, we're not going to rest on our laurels and just keep doing more of what we have been doing. We're constantly looking at improving the ways we get information from people, and that's going to be true throughout the pandemic and beyond that. So hopefully that's given you a bit of a whistle-stop tour of what we've been up to. Really looking forward to the rest of this afternoon and hearing from everybody else, and specifically our users. And with that, I'll hand back over to Anthony. So thank you.
Brilliant. Louise, that was really good, really clear, really crisp. And I like the way that you're presenting that now. The barometer is a great thing. It's a good snappy title as well, because it's got to do with temperature. As you would expect from Transport Focus, we like to bring together a whole range of voices. We've got Baroness Veer, Transport Minister, buses, roads, and other issues under her remit will come to speak to us later. But also what we've done and what we really like to do and what we specialize in is bringing the transport user voice to the table. Now, we're concentrating on public transport today. We've got a further session later in the year where we're looking at car use. But what we have done is we've spoken to and recorded some of the transport users on our communities, which Louise referred to earlier, just to see what their experiences have been during COVID. So we'd just like to play you a few of those now, just so you can hear it direct from the great British public. Thank you.
Because it has been like 7 months, like people are just fed up, and I think they're coming a bit relaxed about wearing a mask and being considerate of other people, and obviously they're not seeing what I'm seeing in the hospital and seeing the numbers go back up.
I bought these now because I can't wear a mask because I suffocate. So look, they've got like glasses and everything's shielded. So these have been marvellous for me because I know I'm exempt and I do have my badge, but people still give you dirty looks. But with these, I can put makeup on as well.
A lot of elderly who are at high risk, and there's all these youngsters who come on the bus and they just all like rush on, and the bus driver doesn't really look in his mirror to look like what they're doing in the back, and they're acting up, they're being silly, and they're taking off their mask. They're not realizing how serious it is.
If I am at the bus stop, people just hold on to me and help me, which is very nice. But I'm a little bit not sure what's the right thing to do, whether they hold on to me, because we still have to keep distance and we have to be a bit, for our own safety. This is this kind of situation we have never experienced in our life before,
On a bus, I make sure I open the window next to me to ventilate air.
I'm doing the best I can, I suppose. I mean, still, like, train cleanliness is a big thing. The other thing is, though, like, see, when you're going to, like, a restaurant or something, there was always the expectation that they should, like, clean the table and clean the seats before a new person comes in. Don't know how that's feasible when you have trains going through various stops where somebody sits up and then another person sits down.
Brilliant. I think those are really powerful stories, and it just underlines and I think reminds us what an extraordinary 8 months it's been for public transport and the whole of the rest of the world and the country. It's been incredible. Mary, can I go to you first? What have you learned at Arriva in the last 8 months? What have been the key 3 lessons that you're going to take out of this?
Good question, straight to the question, Anthony, but to try and condense it down to 3, I think the first thing I'd say is we need to listen to what our customers are telling us and what they're asking for. So, I mean, you said it yourself in the introduction, it needs to be data led. We need to understand what their issues are, then address their issues. So Chiltern, as managing director, people are worried about mask wearing. What can we do to increase mask wearing? The second thing, and it's slightly more philosophical question maybe, but public transport is kind of part of the solution, yet at the moment it feels part of the problem. People are scared of it. That data that Louise put up about non-users not feeling safe, but then the people who are using it are feeling really safe. So how do we make sure that people, I live in London, the roads are so congested. How do we get people back onto public transport? And it comes back in the first point about listening to what they say. And then the third thing, I think there's a bit of an emotional problem here. We can hit them with all the rational facts that you have to wear a mask, cleaning our trains far more frequently. We've got armies of cleaners. Ticketing is all digital. You don't have to see another person. There's enough space for social distancing. But there's an emotional feeling in there. And how do you get people away from that? How do you tie into that emotional feeling away from the rational arguments to get people back to using public transport? If I can just add a fourth, the one thing we've learned is the need to be agile. We have, at Chiltern, we changed everything on nearly a daily basis, particularly from the outset. We had to think on our we had to think on our feet, we had to react quickly, and we really had to continue evolving. And I don't think that's going to stop anytime soon.
Yeah, brilliant. So agility and emotion, I think that's very powerful. And you're right about emotion, because at the beginning of all this, there was a tremendously strong message: avoid public transport and avoid other people. Wasim, do you think Birmingham has changed forever, or what's your sense of what could happen?
But here in Birmingham and the West Midlands, public transport, particularly the bus service, is hugely vital. In fact, pre-COVID, we were looking at the national trend, and bus patronage was going up. Each weekday, so in the region of 850,000 people were using our buses here in our region, which is amazing. Our bus patronage went down to 65% of levels from compared to last year, compared to pre-COVID, which is better than most areas of the country. Currently, it's around 35%. I think the three key things we've learned is face masks are absolutely vital, and we had to work with Transport for West Midlands and the police to look at doing some more enforcement work, but education and informing passengers about the importance of face masks, and then enforcing at times too. We also had to look at our messaging for particular communities. Half from the work we've done locally, half the passengers have expressed some form of concern about public transport, but there's lower concern amongst young people, but higher concern amongst the ethnic minority communities, and that's understandable because of the disproportionate impact that COVID had on the ethnic minority communities. For someone like me who's a bus user, I've got underlying health issues. I'm particularly, I've got concerns too about going back onto public transport. So getting those messages to those communities, targeted messaging around how safe that public transport is, I think is important. And thirdly, I think ensuring that we've still got the right level of reliability of the service is important. And whilst we've done a lot of work around improving cycling and walking facilities, we've also, in our active travel work supported by the government, we've introduced more bus gates and bus lanes, particularly within the city centre, where travel across our city centre is prioritised for public transport over private car. So I think it's really important to ensure we've got the right level of message, the right level of reassurance, but also to ensure that we've got the reliability of the service when capacity on the bus service particularly goes down because of social distancing. We can still put extra buses on and have the right level of reliability.
I think, Wasim, that's a really important point, because when you boil down all of Transport Focus's research into one word, it is reliability. That's what people want from transport systems. That's what they're relying on, the timetable, and the need for that in COVID is even more important because disruption means bunching. People don't like it. Christine, you've been in the front line of operating a service right through the last 8 months. What are your three learnings?
I think the reliability thing has been quite a big point, because I think we've got a clear case study of, with less traffic on the road, how much more reliable we can be, and we've certainly seen that with very, very high punctuality levels for our customers. And also, I suppose, the level of reliance on public transport from a very big part of the population. They have no other way to get around. And I think that became really apparent, especially amongst the key worker population during the actual, the main lockdown that we all had. I think the other thing is that emotional approach to this, and people's different attitudes to risk and how you manage that in public transport. So face coverings, I'm sure, is the same for everybody, has probably been the bane of our life, because there are some people who just choose not to do it for reasons that is best known to them. But when you look at countries where face mask wearing has been always in place on public transport, the South Koreas, the Japan, look at their death rates. And by the way, I'm not saying this comes from public transport, because the rate of transmission is really, really low on public transport. We know that. But where it is used, and generally in culture in those countries, the rate of infection and the rate of death has been a lot less right across the board.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a very interesting point, because you're right. As we've gone through the last 8 months, the kind of messaging about face covering has got stronger and stronger and stronger, and now it's legal force, so it has sunk in, which is seeing relatively good compliance rates. Victoria, this is one of the touchiest issues in this whole debate, isn't it? I know you take a great interest in disability accessibility, wearing a mask exemption, wearing a face covering. Where have we got to on that? Is there anything more we can do, or is it just always going to remain a touchy issue?
Well, it's funny, because I think the videos are fantastic, and I think that all the points made, we've got to listen to our users. So it's all about safety, listening to our users. And in fact, Janice, I really loved what Janice did, because I think that rather than just looking at face coverings, surely something is better than nothing. So what Janice has done, she's actually got something that works for her, isn't covering her nose and her mouth, because if you look around a lot of people that are exempt, the reasons why they are exempt, maybe they've got breathing difficulties, maybe they can't actually cover the nose and mouth. So surely what Janice did, which is absolutely fantastic, she's looked at that, she's done something that works for her. It's really great as well as somebody's actually looking at the fact of lip reading, all these different things come into action with face coverings. It's really separated people, and it's increased hate crime. And I think it was really poignant what Wasim said as well about reaching out to the communities, because there has been an increase on public transport where people, you've got like these two camps at the moment. You've got the fact of people that are wearing the face covering because it is right to wear something if you can, and it actually, without question, it's making it safer for everyone. But and of course the messaging at the beginning was that wear it for other people, but actually we now know it helps you too. So maybe the messaging could have been a bit clearer on that, and maybe it would encourage more people to do it. But we do have this area where some people can't. And there needs to be, and I love the fact of actually what Bus Users UK have got a campaign out at the moment, you know, Be Bus Kind, which is about recognising that not all disabilities are visible, some people can't, and maybe what Janice has actually done, I feel very strongly that maybe something is better. So maybe you can't wear something over the mouth and the nose, but maybe doing something else that will reduce that risk for everyone, and maybe a little bit more messaging around that, a little bit more support around that, and more support around the fact of not everyone can.
Yeah, okay. No, that's very, very helpful. And I think that reinforces what Mary was saying about individuals to a degree have got very different responses to all this. And or Christine was saying, you know, very different tolerances. And what one person thinks acceptable can be quite remarkable in another person's eyes. That's been what's been extraordinary about the last few months. So, Louise, when listening to all that and going back to the inside, what do you think is, where do we go in terms of cleanliness? Because it's obviously a key issue. Rail cleanliness is a bit easier because you can see it happening generally. How do we do it? How do we do more of it on buses, folks? How do we have more visible cleanliness on buses? Louise, anything coming out from the research?
You're right in that it's much easier if you're on in train to see a cleaner come through or see the bins being emptied and all of that, whereas on a bus you don't expect to see that sort of thing. I think some of it is about telling people what you are doing and giving that reassurance of we do this every night in between services, because people don't know necessarily. I think we often imagine that users know more than they do about what is done already and what is being done in addition for COVID. So telling them, and equally making sure that the levels are done adequately and all the time, and allowing passengers and users to report things really easily if they do see anything that is concerning them, I think is also quite an important thing, particularly in these times.
Yeah, I should say that was a question from Patrick Corcoran about the visible cleanliness on bus. And Christine, how are you doing it?
So we are obviously putting out the message, and you're talking about quite regularly in terms of what we are doing. So we are obviously using the fogging technology in the evening, at night. Every single bus is fogged every night with special antiviral solution, and all of the touchdown points are wiped down. But equally, to give that visible, issue you were talking about, we're doing it during the day as well. So at key points around the city, we've got a team that basically go out and wipe down all the touch points at interchanges and things, so that people can see that it is being taken very seriously. Also, we've increased numbers of cleaners and cleaning regime, and I think you're right, that is something that will absolutely stay in terms of the industry going forward.
Victoria, I think you wanted to add to that?
Oh, well, actually, I think Christine answered that very well, because I sent my message. We've done that as well, all the touch points, and we've got visible cleaners within the city, and something moving on after this will definitely stay, and that's a decision we've already made. I think that it's that safety, that cleanliness is really taken off, and we actually have jumping on all of our buses at key points throughout the whole day. So they have the deep clean at night, and then throughout the whole day those touch points are continued, and it really does have an impact, and it makes people feel safe. And that's why I think that perception of when people are traveling, they are feeling safer, but then there's that difference of perception of people that maybe not so feeling safe because they're not on the buses and seeing what's actually happened. Because I think that you can feel the difference on the bus now as well, with the more face coverings, with the cleaning. There's a definite change.
Yeah. Okay. Just moving on. Let's talk about ticketing and how people are buying their tickets. Wasim, do you think we've now seen a kind of profound shift towards contactless that we won't go back from?
You'd hope so, because the whole culture that COVID's really pushed forward, where I very rarely have any change in my pocket, and I know that many people will have that. But I think coming back to some of those communities who are more likely to use the bus service, they are less likely to have a bank account or contactless. And I'm really looking at some of the more poorest communities. So we need to ensure, whilst we really want to move forward to ticketless and cashless payments, we've got to facilitate for those that absolutely need the bus service, who have absolutely no alternative. So when Boris Johnson rightly said that we should be less reliant on the bus service and less reliant on public transport, and if you've got an alternative, go and seek the alternative. During that particular lockdown, there were people here in our city, right across this country, who do not have that alternative, and they are least likely to have contactless forms of payment too. So I think we need to get the balance right, but I think we're absolutely heading in the right direction.
Yeah. Okay. Mary, would you agree with that on trains and bus?
Yeah, I would completely agree with that. I mean, we do have to reflect that there are large swathes of the population that are still using cash. I would like to see, but the vast majority of the population do have smartphones. Not everyone, again, but how do we actually maximise the use of smartphones if people don't want to use contactless, having in wallets that they can pay with, etc., or kind of preloaded wallets, and actually moving to a far more digital-based ticketing. I think actually COVID gives us a really good opportunity as a kind of the burning platform to move there, and we've certainly seen an increase in people using kind of digital smart ticketing on the railway.
Yep. Do you think there's been anything that COVID has taught us that we didn't know before? Or was all of this there before? I mean, people, of course, liked clean trains and buses before COVID. They liked feeling safe. They liked visible staff. People who use contactless loved it. Is there anything actually genuinely revolutionary that's happened in the last 8 months? Or is it really the acceleration of trends, Louise?
There's a question. I think, well, how other passengers are behaving and that direct confrontation around face masks, I think, is a new thing, and it's apparent in every single journey that you come across people who are either doing what is asked of them or not. And I'm not sure it's been as obvious as that in the past, but I think you're right. Most of the things that are important, such as cleanliness, reliability, they've always been there, but the priority of what's important and what good or bad looks like has exploded slightly on some of them.
Yeah. Okay. Christine, anything revolutionary has happened?
I don't think it's revolutionary. I think what's revolutionary is we've all proved how quickly we can change. I think Mary made the point about, how flexible and agile we've been. And there are so many operators put in so many technological advancements in such a short space of time. It's incredible, with being able to look at if your bus is busy, being able to reserve tickets as a trial in one place. There's so many things that have happened in a very short space of time. And I think that'll be to the benefit of the whole industry and our customers moving forward.
Wasim, anything that's taken your breath away the last 8 months, or is this just rapid evolution?
It is rapid evolution, but I'm just, one of the things we were very conscious of is to ensure that there's a level of reassurance in the bus industry. And when we put out, I think in early September, the Birmingham bus statement, that was about sending that surety to those that work in the bus industry in Birmingham, particularly, and across the West Midlands. And we surprised ourselves with the fact that we've got, I think, in the pipeline, the region of £170 million of investment into Birmingham's bus service, with a variety of projects, whether it's greening up our buses, whether it's improving reliability, reintroducing cross-city services. So that for me was just providing that level of reassurance. And then seeing the numbers go back up to 65% of bus patronage just before the second lockdown, that gave me personally a lot of reassurance, because I put a lot of sort of my political baggage into ensuring that we've got an improving bus service in the city, which is absolutely vital for the productivity of our city too.
Brilliant. Mary, anything revolutionary?
So I'm not sure it's revolutionary or if it's just accelerating it, but actually two things from a railway perspective. The first is how we've engaged with our customers, because they haven't actually been on the trains. So we have found new ways to reach out to them. I wouldn't say we've done anything that other sectors are not doing, but we've accelerated how we engage and how we talk to people who aren't on the railway. And the second one is behind the scenes, but actually the railway has come together to work together and to collaborate in ways that we've never seen before. And that ultimately has a benefit for the customer. There's consistency, there's been pace behind it, the contracts have changed. But actually, I think to a lot of people in the rail industry, that's felt revolutionary. And I sincerely hope that the customers have felt the benefit on the kind of front end as well.
Brilliant. Okay. I think it's really interesting going back to this point about how does it feel and the kind of emotions around all this, and does it feel safe, and the fact that being in your car, even though statistically you're at far greater risk of injury by being in a car than you probably are on a bus or a train or wherever, it just feels safer. Is there anything we can do? And there's a great question about what does clean actually mean? We did a bit of work recently which showed that we showed one of our communities the scientific evidence about the fact that public transport is very, very clean. The infection rates are virtually zero. It's not a dangerous environment in any way, shape or form. And the community said, yes, that confirms what we thought, but it isn't going to kind of drive our decision making. I mean, do we just forget the science debate and just tell people we're clean, Christine?
I think it's absolutely a key message, like I said, going forward. I do think we have to keep up this level of visible cleanliness and hygiene. It always was clean, as you say, but there has been more rigorous regimes put into place right across the board. And I think that's absolutely vital going forward.
So, Victoria, blind them with science or just blind them with Dettol?
Information. Just keep information going out to all the groups, all the community groups. Reach out, ask the communities, how do you want us to communicate with you? Which is the best way to communicate with you? And I think that is the question first. What do you need? What do you need us to do? And then just keep sending out the information in the channels and the ways that people appreciate that. And actually, I'll give you a very simple example of that on a lot of the websites across the UK now on transport, you can actually change the languages with all the technology. And a lot of people don't even realise that. So by having the information on a website, if somebody has access to a website, because it could be that they don't, which is why you need to do it through other channels. And so you can be sending out in different languages as well. So yeah, just information on how it all works, and that makes people feel safer.
Brilliant. Good. Okay, I think I'll draw to a close the kind of section about what have we learnt in the last 8 months. Now, we will get our crystal balls out for the next section because we're going to try and think about the future. Now, none of us actually know what's going to happen in the future, otherwise we'd be rich. There's a vaccine potentially in the wings, which sounds very exciting. There are all sorts of other developments happening which may change the way that we travel, although I suspect that the amount of travel to and from work and the amount of travel some of us do for work has probably changed forever. The home working revolution has happened for those of us who can do. The workers have revolted and may well not be going back to the office anytime soon. But let's try and look ahead. And panel, your task in the next section is to come up with the 3 key changes that we need to make in the next 3 months, say, to get ourselves ready for the spring, when hopefully we are really trying to pull people back. People are coming back to public transport. But first, back to the great British public. Let's hear it from the users. Let's hear what our panel had to say about this. Thank you.
Definitely think, going forward I'll still be travelling a lot less. It won't be 4 days a week ever again. Having flexible working, the trains or trams, for example, need to be flexible around that. So if I needed to go in for a meeting in the morning and then I wanted to work from home in the afternoon, I'd go home at lunchtime. So that flexibility at different hours of the time is going to change.
There should be a bus official on the bus, so people like us at least we know we are keeping distance from other people, and people are, keeping according to rules.
You know, like buying tickets and that, I think that needs to change. Having a better system in place, because when I did take the train, I got off at Glasgow because the machine was broken. There was like a massive queue to get a ticket, and I think if you're trying to avoid people like grouping in the one place, there needs to be a better way for people to get their tickets and stuff.
The genie's out the bottle now. People won't subscribe back to that 5 days a week, office regulated, you have to come in, and that, in a way, it's positive for people's well-being and for people's livelihoods. However, when it comes to the transport industry, that would make you question, where is the revenue going to come from?
But yeah, I always know every new year the ticket prices go up. I mean, that's where we're in this situation where it costs over £100 to travel from Glasgow down to London. So it's just nuts.
And of course, it suits the worker to work from home because he saves an hour or two on his working day, and he can do his work in his pajamas.
Brilliant. I think that was great. I haven't, anyone who's worked in their pajamas should put their hand up instantly now and admit it. I haven't actually got that far yet, but I have done it wearing shorts, and it's much more preferable to sweating in the office. I think that's really interesting comments there from our community. The degree of the need for the public transport industry to be even more customer centric, I just think comes across really strongly. And I think that's one of the key learnings from the discussion already today, is that revolution's happened. We've got to stick there. So how are we going to keep these passengers coming back? And there's a great point from Kevin Bell in the comments about, the RAC report that came out, I think, earlier this week, saying that, attitudes to public transport have just changed completely. They're never going back. I think there's a distinction between bus and rail. Bus serves shorter journeys, more local communities. Rail, longer distance, might have changed. The numbers might have changed forever. But if we're going to really get people back on public transport, and don't forget, we've still got a climate emergency rattling around us. There is still a need for that. What are the 3 key priorities that government and others need to get in place? Christine.
Gosh, I've got like 5 here.
You're not allowed 5. You have to pay extra for 5. You've only got 3.
So I saw that report as well, and I would agree that there's a big focus required if we're going to recover through this and meet all the goals of climate change and air quality and reducing congestion in our cities. There has to be a joint working together on this, and I think a big part of that is going to be unlocking space and prioritising public and sustainable transport in our cities. We have seen some of that through the lockdown. I think Wazim mentioned it with priority pop-up, bus priority pop-ups and cycle lanes. We know we're getting more of that, certainly getting more in Scotland, and I know there's recovery partnerships being talked about in England. So that's a really big one to me. We've got to make traffic flow and for me, buses flow more easily around the cities. I think the point on ticketing options and how we sell our products to customers is vital, that we change that. It needs to be more flexible. It needs to go in line with the whole working at home scenario that we will be faced with going forward. And I think that if I've got to pick my third one, it will be working with businesses and industries on trying to flatten the peaks. So clearly during lockdown and even now, our peaks aren't as extreme as they were. But when everyone goes back to work, what will that look like? So we need to work with local businesses and industries to say, how can we stagger times? How can we make it so that we can have that capacity across the board instead of this crazy peaks at the beginning and end of the day?
Okay, that's brilliant. That's really helpful. Wazim, Christine mentioned there space. One of the most valuable commodities in transport is road space. There's a limited amount of it. They're not making much more of it, frankly. Once you start allocating pedestrians, cyclists more space, buses potentially have less. How can we keep the buses rolling, as Christine says, when there's all these other pressures at the moment?
I think we've got to reset and rebalance the relationship between private car, particularly single occupancy private car, and more sustainable modes of transport and buses. Here in Birmingham, we're one of the original motor cities, and for decades and decades, we've prioritized car over all other forms of transport. And we've ended up with a city which is congested, a city with illegal levels of air quality, and major environmental challenges too. And we've got to shift that. Pre-COVID, we've started the process. So one of the things I'm really keen to do is to see where we can reallocate more space to buses. And I think COVID, interestingly, has had a sort of has been the lockdown, the original lockdown, and the reduction in traffic led to people taking more pictures and posting on social media about how clean the air is. I even had people telling me they could taste clean air. I don't know what that tastes like, but it's quite interesting. And I think people are more sort of knowledgeable about the environmental challenges and the impact that has to health. So I think moving forward, certainly with our government mandated clean air zone and the other work that we're doing around climate change and get to carbon neutral by 2030, I think we'll get more support out of communities for these measures. And I'd like to see the greenest bus service in the country based here in Birmingham, and that's why we're investing in hydrogen. NX National Express are investing substantially in fully electric buses too. So I think it's a combination. I'd also like to see greater support for integrated transport. So you can cycle or use an e-scooter for for a half-mile journey from your house to a particular bus stop, and then you can get onto the bus service quite easily. And with our Swift cards here in Transport West Midlands, is how we can ensure that you could use one form of payment mechanism for all these different forms of transport too. So I think it's how we can complement the various modes of transport working together too.
Mary, do you agree with Azim that we can have it all? I mean, my sense is the government's not going to do much to interrupt people using their cars, quite frankly, because it produces revenue for the government, and people have got to get to work. They've got to get around. The person who delivers my packages at home has had to get to the depot to pick up his van to come and deliver them to me. So, do you think we can have it all? I mean, the introduction of low traffic neighbourhoods in London and other places has been very, very heated, to put it mildly. And I heard the best story the other day that somebody met someone who had now bought an extra car. So they had one car on one side of the traffic barrier in their road and one side on the other. So they didn't have to drive round. And if that's not an unintended consequences, I don't know what it is. But Mary, can we have it all?
I'd love to know where they live in London that they can park on both sides. Can we have it all? I think we need to think about this in terms of short term, medium term and long term as well. There's going to be some immediate challenges that we need to get right, but we cannot lose the longer term sight of what we're trying to do with public transport, which goes back into the sustainability agenda. Government is massively subsidising public transport at the moment. To the, I think the latest report was £3.5 billion. That is only going to go up, particularly that was for rail. Sorry, that's only going to go up. And so government is not going to want to continue subsidising public transport to this extent forever. I mean, particularly in a world where there is just not as much money available because of, quite rightly looking after furlough, etc. So limited public funds are going to have to be spent in most sensible way. So I would like to see, the railway working with all stakeholders, whether that's government, customers, etc., to get people back onto public transport, to make it, self-sustaining. How do we do that? We think about it exactly as Wasim said. It has to be integrated. A lot of railway stations are really only accessible by car. How do we make it accessible on bike or on foot? Those sorts of things. But also, for me, I mean, the silver bullet is fares reform for the railway. And in doing that, you can move people to different times of day. You can flatten the peaks. You can shift it around. But also, customers are crying out for this. When I was at Chiltern, every day there was someone on Twitter going, "Are you introducing a different type of season ticket because I'm not travelling into the office 5 days a week?" So we need to react to that and work together to introduce fares reform that will solve more than just kind of the customer angle, but also the peak capacity piece and grow revenue at the same time.
Yes, Mary, I agree. I look forward to the day when I don't have to explain to people why the off-peak single is 10p less than the off-peak return and why that dates back to 1986 or something. But anyway, Victoria, what are your 3 things for the future?
Well, it's actually mainly, I think many of them have been answered. So the flexible ticketing, so that would have been one with that question, and also looking at peak times. But I think about the lines of accessibility, go right the way back to the beginning, and the information that's come from users, from all of our passengers, is that it's about people rely on public transport. Some people don't have other options. We want to get more people onto transport that do have other options as well, because we've got to look at the planet and the climate, but there's actually about making it more space. So at the moment, I think one of the things that's happened around COVID, when we've reduced the amount of people we can have on the bus or on the train, it's about designs of the buses as well. I mean, we've been very fortunate in Brighton that our buses are designed with accessibility in mind. So we have these big open areas which are accessibility for everyone. And that's really helped us during COVID, because it's helped with social distancing. It means that the fact that people are easier to move through the vehicle easier. And I think that would be without question one of the big things to take from this, that we've got to ensure that transport is accessible for everyone. And the only way it's accessible for everyone is to look at the space, is to look at what people's needs are, where somebody's going to have their assistance dog, where somebody who's a wheelchair user, if somebody is actually getting on with their shopping, all these different things has got to be used within transport. But I think I can't give you the three things, because the three things have already been given. But to me, that's the most important, is around accessibility.
Now, come on, panel. You're trying to have it all. How are we going to take cost out of these systems? Because there's not so much revenue coming in. The railways in particular is facing a real revenue crisis, as Simon Calder, the transport journalist, has said in the chat. Unless you do something like you incentivize people to use contactless rather than using cash, surely we're just going to be hobbled with all these legacy systems forever, and we're never going to make all of this work, because somebody's got to pay for this. There's only two sources: the taxpayer and the fare payer. It ain't coming from anywhere else generally. Louise, what do you think?
I think there's scope for rethinking everything, as we've been talking about, making the kinds of tickets that people want to use, incentivizing people to use public transport, thinking about disincentivizing them to use alternatives. Private transport is important, as we've talked about. I think that there is unmet potential there. There is scope for people to start using public transport and contributing fares, but I think there's a need for kind of innovation and encouraging them back by doing all the kinds of things that we've been talking about, and getting people who didn't used to use public transport even before COVID, as sort of classic non-users, getting them along the path, perhaps by seeing the improvements that have been made post-COVID, so that they become users, so eventually growing the total market.
Okay, yep, that's very good. Right, Wasim, what are your three you want to see in Birmingham?
So I think it's been touched on. I really want to see the cleanest and the greenest public transport service here in Birmingham, and I'm particularly conscious there's some bus services, the 11 bus, which I think is the longest bus route in Europe, goes past 300 schools. And whilst we're trying to tackle the air quality challenges, I think it's really important that we have the cleanest in Birmingham, in particular in areas where we've got the highest amount of inequalities. I'd like to see more young people use buses, and I think we need to make using buses and trains part of the culture, and more young people we get using it, the less likely they are to go to private car. No, the levels of young people going into private cars reducing, but I want to see that further reduce. I want to see the level of public transport use that we've got across Europe, because it's cheaper, it's reliable. It gets you from A to B in a far more reliable way than being stuck in traffic with private car. Reliability, again, that is possibly the most important. That's what people tell me all the time. Making our bus service, making our public transport reliable. They want to get from A to B in 40 minutes rather than 1 hour, 40 minutes, or on a good day, 20 minutes. They want to have that level of reliability, and ensuring that we've got the right level of priority given to our public transport is really important.
Okay. Christine, in Dundee, virtually everything that makes the city tick arrives on a truck of some size. Trucks and deliveries are jostling for space with buses, cycles, pedestrians, e-scooters, goodness knows what else. How do we keep Dundee ticking over with all these demands on this space? I mean, nobody's mentioned road pricing yet, the key ghastly word that makes politicians run away. But what do you think? How do we keep it all working?
I think it's about the joined up approach. Clearly, those things have to get there too. You know, people rely on the goods and services coming in. So it's about a joined up approach across all modes. We've been working quite closely with local authorities on what we're calling transforming transport in Dundee and how you can make traffic move more freely around the city depending on what its purpose is. So I think there's maps you can plot there to try and accommodate some of that. It's really difficult in a city like Dundee because it's quite built in. So it's really hard to make those changes. But I think there are positive steps we can take forward.
Yeah. Okay. And I think, yeah, it's going to be difficult. That it's got to be joined up, otherwise it's not going to work. I mean, there used to be a delivery. I'm in the office today because my internet's not working at home, so I came in, and the Tesco shop around the corner every day. The delivery would get a parking fine, and you just think there must be a better way of organising society than this. It's just really silly, but these are tough challenges, and it's very tight. Now, any other business, as Andrew Meany from Auxera asks in the chat, any other business trying to restart use would cut prices, slash great offers, come back, try one, bring one free. Mary, can we do this? Can we get on with it?
Well, we're in the middle of a lockdown, so not currently, but I think all the rail operators are really thinking about how we get these customers absolutely critical. I would like us to embrace technology and innovation as well to get these customers back and to think differently. Yes, we can use kind of all the marketing. I don't think train companies will be in this competition with each other as they were previously. So a customer on the railway is a positive in the broader sense. But I'm always glass half full, and I'm also, what does the data say? You know, and glass half full. There's opportunities here for people who leisure travel. I know someone in the comments has talked about leisure travel. Leisure travel, you know, it is a growth area. We might see more domestic holidays. I see people who aren't travelling on the train during the week for work use it more at the weekend. So it's not a one size fits all. For different segments, let's work out what is actually happening in that segment and then tailor an offering to them to either grow or stimulate people to use it. And I mean, Christine said it in terms of kind of road usage, but actually it needs to be an integrated transport. We need to think about it in a joined up way, not just about the railway, but just a kind of the wider transport and road usage across the UK.
Do you think there's a real trick that we can pull off here? Because the peak was so expensive to provide and so difficult to maintain frequencies in the peak. Now the peak seems to have calmed down. Can we spread things out and spread the cost out? Do you think this could be the saving grace of the public transport sector, Wasim?
I think we've got no other option other than do this. Our environmental challenges mean that we have to ensure that we've got a strong public transport system. But I think this new norm, which is there going to be an AM and PM peak, or are we going to? Certainly in Birmingham, we've seen peaks starting from 10 AM after the first lockdown and going on until 2 PM. It's a different way of working. Our city centre will have to we have to recreate in a way a city centre with less demand for office space and more demand for city centre living and create communities. So I think there's ample opportunity there on the back of the challenges we've had with COVID. I think moving forward, there's opportunities to ensure that we can rescue the public transport system. And things like what was just said from the previous speaker around having holidays within domestic holidays. I think that's a new market in itself that we can explore, particularly ensuring that the level of safety, COVID safety internally for some people is far more important than traveling to the other side of the world where they are unknowns as well.
So Mary, can we just strip out the peak and spread that money elsewhere and cater for these new markets? Is that your kind of trick?
I think that I'm not sure. Well, I think in the short term we could certainly reduce the peak and take some cost out of it and actually make the railway more reliable. I think, I don't have a crystal ball. Longer term, I see it with my colleagues. There is some pent up demand to go into the office, but how do we actually get people to travel at different times of the day? It's just not going in 5 days a week, but people, I think, are missing those side conversations, missing conversations with their peers, that social aspect of it. So I think we can certainly reduce the peak, but I actually think, the number of key workers still travelling, they still need to get to work for the start of their shift. People in offices will probably still want to go in before 10 o'clock, to make a day of it. So I think there will still be some need for a peak, but how can we spread it? And I think it's on us as public transport operators to think creatively about how we do that.
Yeah. Christine, is your new peak kind of Saturday evening or rather Monday morning? I mean, where's it going? Or where was it going?
It's middle of the day. It's very much as Wazim said. It was between 10 and 3 actually for us. We have seen that since the schools went back. We've seen that kind of being flatter. I would say slight tick up at either end of the day, but it is different. I think we can, like I said before, work on that with industry. But the other thing that I think we can work on in terms of the reducing cost side of things, which we need to do, as you said, with this lower level of people travelling at the moment, is actually that work we talked about in terms of faster journey times for bus, because we've done an exercise, as of my colleagues in National Express in the West Midlands, about how much time we saved and therefore how much resource we could save if that was the norm. And I think that really has to be our focus moving forward if we want a viable network.
Yeah, okay, brilliant. Let's just shift the focus. I mean, we've been talking really about what happens around towns and cities. It is actually where most of the population live, but a substantial number of people live in more rural areas. Colleague of mine, Dan Taylor, has asked a question. What about rural areas? What has COVID taught us about transport in rural areas? Or is it just basically get in your car? Victoria, what's your sense?
Well, I think rural is a really, really important question. And funnily enough, I think you will find in rural areas that especially in some areas of the bus industry, that some of the vehicles in the rural areas tend to be the older vehicles that are being cascaded down, which tend to be a lesser design on accessibility as well. And I know I'm banging the drum again on accessibility, but I think that's really key, because be integrated within transport to make sure people are using the bus, getting the bus to the train station, to get on the train, cycling, walking, using scooters, all these things that Wazim and Mary and Christian have all been talking about as well. Within rural areas, if there will be an increase, if people will feel more able to give up their cars and actually use the bus, if there's more accessibility within that. But then it comes down to cost as well, which we all know about running the routes within a rural area. But actually, as people look towards more about the environment and people are actually looking about the fact of the planet, there could be a real increase there amongst passenger numbers that want to come from the rural areas and go into travelling, moving around, tourism increasing, staycations, all of those things. So actually there could be a real investment there for the future. And one of the things that I really look towards as well is why bus design is so important. Any bus that we design now, in 15 years from now, if it is cascaded down, especially in a rural area, that's going to be less accessible than actually a new design bus as it is at the moment. And actually with the aging population and a lot more people within rural areas that maybe not be able to drive anymore, may actually, with people living longer, are more reliant on the bus industry, I do think there's a real change for investment within those areas. And if we want to increase passenger numbers, we've got to look at that investment, and there are ways to do it. So it's about getting our heads together. We've done it in the last few months, so we can do it now.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, one of the ways that you change habits and change patterns of travel is to incentivize it. And
absolutely,
I think the ultimate incentivization is making it free, such as travel in London was for the under 18s and for us over 60s off peak. But that's going to become expensive. Louise, what does our insight tell us about rural areas?
We know that for people who don't have an alternative to using public transport, rural buses particularly are an absolute lifeline to them. And, even when services are reduced, they often adapt their lives to to sort of fit in with whatever that reduced service is. I mean, use of other modes, taxis, if they don't have access to a private car, is often prohibitively expensive, and there is a real kind of need to make sure that people can make the journeys that they need to, and that's where things like demand responsive transport can really come into play, even if sort of commercial services aren't possible anymore. But it's really important that people who need to get places are able to do so during COVID and obviously beyond.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you very much. Right, we're going to change pace again. I'm very pleased to say that Baroness Veer has joined us. I think, Baroness, you were able to hear some of that debate and some of that discussion, which is great. I understand you have pressing matters afterwards, therefore cannot stay for Q&A. But thank you very much for making the time to talk to us this afternoon. You're very welcome, and the stage is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anthony. Yes, it is a particularly busy day, and it was interesting to hear you talk about buses, because I've literally just come back from the chamber where I was doing a question on rural bus services and what we're going to do about them. Yeah, it was very, very interesting. But of course, I wish I was talking to you at a less challenging time. It is incredibly busy across the transport sector at the moment, and not for good reasons. And there's an awful lot of work to be done. And of course, in terms of where we are with COVID, the resurgence we'd hoped would never come has come, and we've got to deal with it. And so, it's impacting our country and clearly other countries around the world. But I think I want to just focus on a couple of things today. The first is how we are providing a safe and reliable transport network. I mean, I think it is important. A lot of people do still have to travel. They can't sit in their comfy homes. They've got work to go to. And it's really important that if they need to use public transport, that it is safe and it is reliable. And of course, because of passenger numbers, we've had to support the industry, and we will support the industry in the future. And then, of course, there's a whole new world post-COVID, whenever that may be. And there's a huge amount of work going on in that area. But during COVID, safety of staff and passengers was an absolute priority. And I think, throughout my time of everything that's happened in the last 9 months, whatever it's been, making sure, particularly for staff, we need them to come into work to carry on providing the service. So we absolutely needed to give them the reassurance that we were doing everything possible to make sure that bus drivers and train operators and people at the gate line all felt safe and able to do their jobs. So that was a really, really important issue for us. And of course, also for passengers, to give them the sort of guidance. I mean, take yourself back 9 months. Do you remember when we were going through all of this and we were going through the guidance and, we were going through it again and again and trying to make it nice and simple. And it's amazing, actually, when I look at, and actually that guidance has stood the test of time. We pretty much got it right towards the start. And I think that's been really beneficial, because what it then meant that the communications messages that went out into the sector have pretty much stayed the same, which has been, again, really good for helping people who do need to travel to actually do so safely. And of course, in all of that, we've been reliant upon the people working on the networks, and they have responded brilliantly. And you will remember as well, I mean, again, we're sort of looking at this for months and months ahead. Transport was the first sector to say you should wear face coverings. We got there first. We recognised it and came in and said, and there were two reasons, firstly, obviously for safety, but secondly for confidence, so that people felt able. And I'm really pleased, actually, at the moment, the take up of face coverings remains pretty good. We actually have a lot of focus on enforcement from a ministerial level across Whitehall on making sure that everybody is all joined up so that enforcement continues. So we talk to the police. And so this goes right to the very top, goes to COVID-0, which is chaired by Michael Gove, and we talk about compliance and enforcement of face coverings there. And transport is doing pretty well. So thank you to all your efforts and the efforts of everybody who's been involved in the sector. It has been just amazing. So at the moment, obviously, we're in the November restrictions, I think we're allowed to call them. And we have asked people to avoid travel, but as I said, some people do have to, and we need to make sure that they can. And we've been able to do that with a sort of incredible level of engagement that certainly all of the ministers and DfT have had, far more than in a normal business as usual time. I meet, representatives and operators, almost every day. It is that sort of level of engagement. And one of the things we had a conversation with about the other day is accessibility concerns, because of course that is also incredibly important, where we've introduced, mandated face coverings, and we had quite a significant conversation with the operators and the people who were on that call, because of course, it is not the case just because you have a disability, you don't have to wear a face covering. It is certain people don't have to wear a face covering. So in our conversations with the disability groups, who are very much often approached accessibility things as in their entirety for a group of people. And actually now we're not talking about that same group of people. Some of those people would be traditionally within the disability, the disabled world and represented by those groups, but actually others wouldn't. Others who have asthma probably wouldn't. So it's been a slight mind shift as to how we've been able to think about enforcement of face coverings. And it's quite interesting, some of the enforcement that's been done where we've done sort of really, I don't want to call it heavy-handed, robust, let's call it robust enforcement. It actually turns out that just that we got it down to 1% of people ended up saying, they were exempt, and we felt, we weren't bullying people, I promise, but it was just quite interesting to try and sort of understand what sort of percentage of people are we talking about here? But obviously there is that really important balance. We do not want people on the bus frowning at people when they haven't got a face covering. We've got to make it acceptable for people not to be wearing a face covering and for us to be understanding. But we also need to be understanding that there will be people on the bus who are not wearing a face covering. They need to wear a face covering, and they're not helping themselves, but more importantly, they're not helping anybody else, and they're not helping the system. So it's a very interesting bit of work going on around that. But Transport Focus has done some fantastic work, during the pandemic, which has highlighted obviously the levels of confidence that people are feeling, different groups are feeling, and obviously as we come out of this, their work will be really, really important. But just going back, I do have some good news, I think, on the accessibility side, that last week we had 4 transport operators have been accredited for their role of improving the transport experience for disabled people. I'm disappointed it's just 4. I think we might be able to boost that, but 4 is better than nothing. So it's a good start, a very good start. So, again, if you think about where we've come from and how much support we've had to provide the sector, I'm spending money like water at the moment. It's grim. But it's good because it's got to be done, right? So, buses, £27.3 million a week. In total, we'll probably end up maybe around £1 billion just on supporting the services nationwide. It's an incredible amount of money. Imagine if we could spend that in normal times. I caught the earlier comment about imagine if transport was free, and saying about how Transport for London, and they're free for under 18s and free for the over 60s. So we've actually had to provide Transport for London. We've agreed £3 billion to keep their show on the road for this financial year, which is in an extraordinary amount. And I have to be honest, as a condition of that £3 billion, the mayor has to pay for free transport for the under 18s. I'm not entirely sure why we could ask the national taxpayer to pay for free travel for my 16-year-old. She can afford her own bus fare. So we've had some very interesting conversations with the mayor, and it's going, clearly it's not going to end in the end of the financial year. We're going to have to continue to have some interesting conversations there. And also, we've supported the light rail industry to the tune of £160 million. Sometimes I think they sometimes feel like they're the forgotten part of the transport network, and I think they shouldn't be. I think they're really, really important. So I was really, really pleased that we were able to do that. And as you know, obviously the rail companies, who interestingly, of course, have been hardest hit in terms of the fall of passenger numbers. Just an interesting, people have just, they still ride the buses somewhat, but they're not riding the trains. And I think that's probably all sorts of factors involved in that. And I think as we come out of this pandemic period, we're going to have different ways of encouraging different people back onto different networks. And I think, the segmentation is going to be really, really important. So, but anyway, enough of the sort of the grim stuff, because there is some really, really good stuff going in the department as well. So as you probably know, my portfolio in particular covers buses, and so we're working really hard on the national bus strategy. There's a huge incentive for us to reform buses, and I think an opportunity. What I have found over the period of the pandemic is that relations between local authorities and bus operators have improved, which is very good. And I think we want to be able to sort of use that as a catalyst for how we can develop better partnership working going forward. So our national bus strategy, it's being worked on incredibly hard. But of course, it's really difficult because at the moment we've got very shifting sands. And so we've got two elements to the bus strategy. We've got to recover the industry, and then we've got to look for its great and glorious future in an environment where you're not entirely sure of the ground that you're standing on. So it's made our lives harder, but we've absolutely recognised that we have to do it. And so we are working very, very hard on that. And of course, taking forward some of the other things that we'd already introduced. Bus open data is going very well, which is really helpful for the user. And obviously continuing our work in getting some cleaner, greener buses onto the network, which is excellent. So I think finally, really, I just want to say thank you to Transport Focus. I mean, they are really, really helpful in providing the evidence that we need that gives us the rod in our back and the fire in our bellies to provide for passengers in the future. Because when I actually went on holiday over the summer. I went away for a week, which is remarkable. And I look back on it now and think, well, wasn't I lucky? I went to Athens, went to Greece. There was no one there. It was very depressing. But I was thinking about the bus strategy by the pool, as you do. And I was really, really clear, and I emailed back to the officials and I set out the sort of 5 strands that I wanted to talk about in terms of modernising different bits of it. But I said at the absolute heart of it, there are 2 things. There is the passenger, and there is not a passenger yet, but we want them to be a passenger. So that's what you're going to see in the bus strategy, passenger at its heart. And then how do we get the people who don't ride with our buses onto our buses? Because that's how we're going to get growth. And I think, we're going to have to do some segmentation. We look at get the youngsters on early. I think once a bus rider, always a bus rider. How are we going to get these people on? So that'll be the big focus. So I think that's pretty much enough for me. But thank you all for everything that you're doing. We all love transport. We want it to succeed. We want our public transport to be there when we can all get back out there and use it every day. And it's down to the efforts of everyone on this call, the insights of Transport Focus, and the work that we're able to do in government to support it, to make sure that we actually can do that. So thank you very much.
Baroness, thank you. That was absolutely brilliant. I think we've reached nirvana when we have a transport minister who worries about buses as they're lying beside the pool. I think that's just fantastic, and long may that last. And I think the profile you've brought to bus and has been remarkable. And we're talking more about buses than I can remember, certainly in the last 10 years since Transport Focus has been working in this area, and certainly in my last 20 years of working in transport. Bus is now key part of the solution of transport for the future, and long may it last, and strength to your elbow, and we'll be there to help. So thank you very much indeed, Baroness. Really appreciate you taking time out of your schedule today. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Anthony, and thanks everyone. Enjoy your day.
See you later.
Bye-bye.
And good. We right, let's canter on. We've got a few minutes left. We're going to just keeping up the focus on the user. We're going to return to hear a little bit more from transport users, and then we will have time after that for perhaps 2 or 3 more killer questions. So think about your questions while you're watching and listening to what transport users are saying. Then we're going to wrap up on time. So back to the show reel, please.
I've got anxiety as a diagnosed condition since I was 16. In high pressure situations, or where to me it feels like a high pressure situation, going on the train and the potential for catching something because of people's ignorance. If I can avoid that at any cost, then I will.
When I have, say, got the tram or the train, on the odd occasion it's been very, very empty, which is quite nice. It's quite a nice experience. It's a little bit eerie, but I could get used to it.
The reason I've avoided public transport is I'm not convinced being in such a confined space, and trains, I'll be honest, are not really hygienic. Like, I'm trying not to touch place surfaces and stuff like that. And
I have no vision. Since March, I have only used buses twice because I would not be able to see whether I'm keeping distance from other people or whether other people on the buses are wearing masks.
I have tried to just drive so far just because I am working in a hospital, and I just don't want to put myself at that risk for myself and working within a hospital environment.
And I get the bus every day, and I have done since the beginning. I've just been very careful. Nobody sits next to each other, so you can get on with your shopping and put it on the seat next to you and nobody gives you a dirty look.
Great stuff. Good to hear it direct from the passengers. Wow, some real challenges in there. Right, panel, who are we going to target as the transport users of the future? Who are these people who we're going to really focus on? Mary, you kick off.
Ever the optimist, I would say we need to focus on everyone. I said it at the beginning, public transport is part of the solution in terms of sustainability in the widest possible sense, and congestion, etc. I think we can go with a one size fits all because every user needs something slightly different. So we can't look at public transport users as one homogenous group. And so we need to actually be agile enough that we can tailor our offerings to the different groups in a simple and straightforward and not confusing way as well. And by different groups, I include the old and the young, I include the accessibility piece, how people want to pay. I see there's been lots of comments about how people, we can't exclude it. Public transport is a great way to level up. We hear the government talking about the levelling up agenda. A good public transport system is fundamental to kind of the economic and social opportunities for everyone. So I don't think we should focus on one group. We should look at all the different groups, segment them, and then tailor our offering according to what they need on public transport.
Brilliant, thank you. Wasim, you talked about younger passengers earlier. Is that where your focus is?
I think we've got to target young people. I think everybody too. I think we need to ensure that we've got a diverse public transport network. Looking at cross-city bus services as we are in Birmingham, I'm particularly keen to get more people from inner city Birmingham and inner city communities back onto the bus service because they have the sort of greatest coverage of bus services, particularly they come through the inner city area. So to try and encourage more of them to leave their cars at home and use the buses, I think is really, really important.
Okay, brilliant. Christine, who are you focusing on? Are you targeting everyone?
I kind of got to agree with Mary and Wasim. Yeah, I think it is everybody. I think there's a big requirement from a bus perspective to get more of the professional people travelling on bus. I think it's very much seen as a certain demographic that use it, and that's not the case. But I think we need more of that. If you look at Lothian, in Edinburgh, they have a lot of commuters travelling for work and in professional environments every day, and that's what we need more of. We need those people on board. So how do we make our network such that it goes through all areas of the city and attracts those people? I think young people is a particularly important group as well because we do need to get them young.
Okay, Victoria, you going after everyone?
Absolutely, but I think it's very poignant what's been said, because actually that about the demographic, I think we must be very lucky in Brighton, because until COVID, we saw over the last 20 years, we increased our passenger numbers every single year. And it's through several measures that we have. Is the demographic is across everyone, commuters, young people. We have a bus ID system where we actually, from the age of 5, children will carry a bus ID. That gives them cheaper fares immediately, going all the way through to 18 years of age. So it's not free travel, but it's reduced travel, which helps everyone. It helps the child, it helps the family, and it encourages, and funny enough, something that Baroness Veer said, if you know that actually somebody will carry on using the bus. So it is across everyone. And I think it's about getting that message out. We are, like Lothian, we're very, very lucky that people use the bus and people see it as a necessity. And it is a necessity for everyone.
Louise, in the past, Transport Focus has always really focused on value for money, perhaps, rather than absolute cost of transport, because your cheap is more expensive and vice versa. Do you think that will hold true for the future?
I think how much it costs and does that feel like value to me are always going to be key factors in evaluating what it's like and should I use public transport or not. I think, you know, a key group is people who we know used to use public transport pre-COVID and don't feel comfortable about it right now. That would seem across the demographics to be a really key group to entice back, because broadly they were satisfied before, but they need support to be encouraged back on. We've done so much work that tells us that when you get non-users to try using a mode of public transport, they're pleasantly surprised and you know, they become almost evangelical about how brilliant it was and why didn't I know about this before. You know, we should have more of that. And of course, even people who are using some public transport can use more. They can make more journeys. They can use other modes of public transport. So there's a lot of opportunity out there, I think.
But panel, do you, question from my colleague, Ian Wright. Do you think pre-pandemic levels of sort of crush crowding will ever be acceptable again, or do you think that's just unacceptable? And if that's the case, who's going to pay for all this space around me? Mary?
Well, it's a very good question. I do suspect in 5-10 years this will all be forgotten, and we'll all look back and go, I remember those days. We might have a vaccine. But also say, was the level of crowding we saw on some of our rail services ever acceptable? I mean, we have all been on train services that are just so full, and it's about how we use, you know, whether it's different rolling stock, more capacity in terms of infrastructure, how we spread people out across the day. I would like to say we'll never go back there, but I suspect at some point in the future we will get back to these levels. It's when it will happen, and then how do we manage it?
Wasim, do you think that those levels of crush loading have gone?
I agree with Mary. I think it's going to take a while before we can get back to anywhere near that. And as she said, it was never acceptable. I sometimes think, you know, will I be allowed back into Villa Park with 40,000 other Villa fans to watch football again? And I think there's a lot of work to get back to that level of crowding, not just on public transport, but just again. So I think there's going to have to be some changes. There's no two ways about that.
Yeah. Okay. Christine, what's your sense of this?
I think it's a really difficult one. I think, like Wasim said, it's going to take a while to get to that point. But while we're kind of working through going from where we are now to where we hope we will get to in terms of passenger numbers coming back, the question of how do we support that is a really difficult one, and one we all need to approach quickly, because we are getting to the stage where we're tipping over into being more busy, if you like.
Yeah. And I think Victoria makes a really good point in the chat about design has got a role in this, because sometimes things feel crowded when actually they're not. It just, you know, the old 2+3 train seating, I think hopefully is gone forever. It was going anyway, and design can make spaces feel much bigger than they are. Victoria?
Absolutely, and we've done that already in Brighton. And in fact, when Baroness Veer was speaking earlier about the Leader Scheme, we're one of the operators that have achieved leader status in the inclusive transport strategy, and a large proportion of that is that we've listened to our passengers, of course, which is what's so important. But the design of our buses, we've redesigned our buses, we've made them more spacious, more accessible, and we haven't lost seats. So we've got these areas where, especially with more flip seats, and that you can actually have more buggies, more space for wheelchair use, and more space for everybody. But if needed, you can have the seats space as well. And this has really helped us during COVID because it's helped with that social distancing. So we strangely enough, we weren't ready. Nobody knew COVID was coming, but it's really helped us during COVID and that spacing area. And moving forward, all design should be more accessible. Absolutely. Design is really important.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. I mean, sadly, we are running out of time. Don't rush off, audience, and go and put your kettle on quite yet, because we have got a goodie for you at the end of the conference. So don't go away without your digital goodie bag. It's sadly not quite the same as real conferences, but pretty much as good. I think it's been a fantastic session. You've been a great audience. You've been very active. Lots of good questions, lots of good chat. Thank you very much. Panelists, thank you very much indeed. You've just been outstanding, really clear, honest replies. What I've taken from this is what we learned from the last 8 months is about that visible cleanliness. It's about reliability still being key. It's about enforcement of the rules really matters. People want to see visible enforcement and taking forward all those things. And also what all of the panel really focused on is we've never had such a focus on the passenger from these industries. And I think that's really good, and that should really continue, because in future, people are still going to have a choice about how they travel. And as Baroness Veer said, the government is now more focused on this than they ever were before. And that's a good side effect of this horrible, horrible disease. The future, well, it is an uncertain future, but I think what we've got from today is some really clear markers about continuing with all those good things that have been happening in the last 8 months, and really building back public transport as clean and green, building it as reliable. The sense of space around passengers is very important. Hopefully the peak has gone forever. We can spread the peak out to a greater degree, and we must continue to reduce the barriers to public transport travel, fares in particular, contactless, making it easier to pay, making paying virtually invisible, and very powerful things around that. So thank you very much indeed. This debate could go on for hours. We've got so much to talk about and so much insight. And what we have for you at the end of this conference, the questions that were asked of our transport user panel, we asked them in much more, which you saw on the videos today, we asked them in much more detail in our communities. There's a download, much more data, much more insight, as you would expect from Transport Focus. We lead with the evidence. So thank you very much indeed. It's been a great hour and a half. It's gone very quickly, and stay safe. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you very much. Take care. Travel safely.